Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the latest installment of American Ballet Theatre's pop-up book club. This is the space that we discuss upcoming ABT ballets that are inspired by great works of literature. And we're so excited to have you all here today to explore ABT's upcoming production, WOOLF WORKS. And we're going to be talking about how Virginia Woolf inspired this amazing piece of work and the people involved. My name is Iseult Gillespie. I'm a researcher and a producer. A few years ago, I wrote a short film about Virginia Woolf, about her life and her work. And she's a figure who is always so ripe for discussion and modern reinterpretation. So for the next hour, we're going to talk about how choreographer Wayne McGregor, the creative team, and the dancers are interpreting and reimagining Woolf on stage. We're joined today by 4 distinguished guests, including the dramaturg on WOOLF WORKS, Uzma Hameed. Uzma is a British writer, director, dramaturg, and frequent collaborator with choreographer Wayne McGregor. And we're lucky to have her zooming in from London today. So thank you for making time in your evening. We are also joined by 3 of ABT's esteemed principal dancers, Calvin Royal III, Devon Teuscher, and James Whiteside. All 3 made their debuts in WOOLF WORKS during ABT's North American premiere in Costa Mesa, California. That was this past April. And they will make their New York debuts in a variety of roles and personas. And we'll be talking more about that in a moment this summer. So welcome to our panelists. Welcome to everyone who's watching. And we will get started. So Uzma, Wayne McGregor first premiered WOOLF WORKS in 2015 for the Royal Ballet in London. And can you just tell us what inspired this ballet?
Well, Wayne and I have a history of kind of giving each other books to read. And at this point in time, he'd sort of become resident at the Royal Ballet, and we were discussing, what books or plays might make interesting new ballets. And there were quite a few things in play, but it seemed to us that Virginia Woolf would be a really good fit for Wayne's work, because there's something about her fascination with peeling back layers of narrative to get to the essence of experience in a very immediate and very sensory and very direct way underneath, that very much speaks to Wayne's work, which also sits between narrative and abstraction. It's not purely abstract, but it's not pure narrative ballet either. And so there was something that seemed like a very natural fit about that. Then also Woolf was so fascinated with other kind of grammatologies that she could bring into her writing to make it, I guess, fit for many purposes, so that it could be the most poetic, abstract, kind of high-flown language, but could also describe the most pedestrian, everyday things. And in kind of seeking to make language more muscular in that way, she looked to science, she looked to painting, she looked to music. She as you know, she was a kind of a magpie in the way that she drew on the languages of other forms. And that again spoke to Wayne's work, who has always worked a great deal in collaboration and is very interested in what he often describes as a collision of ideas, and how dance, by making these amazing alliances with not just stagecraft, but with, say, science and technology, can also extend the reach of what it can say and what it can do.
I love what you're speaking about this collision of themes and influences and how we see that play out in so many ways over the course of this ballet. And you touched on this a little, but it's not, a straightforward adaptation of Woolf's work. It is more about being loosely inspired by these books, but by also her life, by themes from across her writing, and from how she approached her craft and her life. And another fluid part of this ballet is how the characters are portrayed. So each dancer is sometimes performing aspects of the characters, sometimes expressing Woolf herself, and sometimes embodying or expressing her themes. So maybe Calvin, Devon, James, could you just each tell us a little bit about the role that you play and the different roles and how you prepared for them?
Okay, I'll start. Hi, everybody. My name is James. I play the role of Peter in the three-act ballet WOOLF WORKS. And my part is actually pretty loose because I transform throughout the ballet. And I end up in the third act being Virginia's longtime companion, you know? So I start out as Peter, a character from Mrs. Dalloway, and I am this charismatic, sort of, I don't know, full of life guy who has a lot of dancing in the first act. I dance with a lot of different characters, and I sort of move through these different scenarios and scenes, um, like right, back to back to back to back to back, and it's pretty tiring, I'll add. But it's a very beautiful, sweet, even act one. And then I don't do act two, which is the becomings, it's called. And then I do act three, which is called Tuesday. And at the beginning of the act, um, a very famous actress, Gillian Anderson, reads Virginia Woolf's suicide note. And the act begins with a pas de deux between me and Devon, who is playing Virginia Woolf. And it's very, very dark, I'd say, and human and peaceful and um, sad. But it's really, it takes you to another world. It's hypnotizing. And my role in that third act is one of peace and support and calm in you know, to be there for a woman who has made the choice to take her own life.
I'll go from there. As you hear, hi, I'm Devon Teuscher. As you heard, I play the role of Virginia Woolf throughout the ballet. In the first act, it is called I Now, I Then, which is loosely based on the Woolf novel Mrs. Dalloway. And so in that first act, I also, as well as going between Virginia Woolf, I also go between the character of Clarissa, which is the main character in Mrs. Dalloway. And so that act is actually I would say, much more fluid as to portraying both of the characters of Clarissa and Virginia Woolf at the same time, like how they mesh, how they align, how much their stories align and their paths align and their identities and their personhood intertwine and relate. And then I'm also not in Act Two, which is based on the novel Orlando. And then in Act Three, I'm in Tuesday playing the role of Virginia Woolf. And I would say that is mostly based on the life of Virginia Woolf. It feels like a true homage, honor towards her life and towards the end of her life and towards towards death and the peace and the beauty and the almost celebration of one's life that can come at the end of one's life, choosing to take their life, even though that is a difficult thing to do. That act really feels like to me, oddly, a celebration of life, even though it was through suicide.
Hi everyone, I'm Calvin. I play the role of Septimus, which is one of Virginia's characters in Mrs. Dalloway. Septimus appears in part one of the 3 parts of the production, I Now, I Then. And he's a character who suffers from PTSD or shell shock, and essentially is balancing between the hallucinations and the world that exists in his own mind, from the trauma of war and being in the trenches and meeting a comrade, his officer Evans, who they really share a really deep bond with, juxtaposed with the reality that he lives after the war, when he's married to a woman from Italy and who's trying to bring him out of his mind, and who's trying to, it's built into the choreography where she's constantly pulling him and trying to get him to hold her, and maybe they could have a baby that would solve a lot of the trauma that he's experienced. And so we sort of see his story play out in part one. And then I'm also in part two, which is Becomings. And my role throughout Becomings is a bit less defined in a way, but more, Wayne said something when he came and worked with us in the studio about how each time we enter the stage, it's about this idea of becoming and human virtuosity, about being able to transform in a way. And with each passage and with each coupling that you do across the stage, it's like you're able to add a new dynamic or a new flavor, or a new personality. So that's my my role in part two, Becomings.
So you all embody these very complex parts and personas, and James and Devon and Calvin, you've spoken about transformation, about acceptance, death, difficulty, trauma. These are all experiences that are incredibly complex and incredibly difficult to talk about in language sometimes. And that's something that we see in Virginia Woolf's work all the time, is that she is trying to find new ways to express these states that are very difficult to discuss. And she's constantly coming up against the limits of language to express what it's like to live a whole embodied life. So in terms of the choreography and the staging, I guess my question for you, Uzma, is what can dance do that words on a page cannot, and how are you exploring this idea of the limits of language in WOOLF WORKS?
Well, in a way, it was less about the limits of language and more about the kind of riches on offer, because Woolf's writing is so many things. And one of our mantras, in fact, was Woolf's own statement: the book is not form which you see, but emotion which you feel. And so when we're talking about how that she borrowed from all of these languages, one of the effects that has in her writing is that it's highly sensory. When you read Woolf, you feel like you're inside a world where the colors are very vivid, the sounds are very deep and sonorous. Everything's very kind of heightened and almost hyper real. And so I think that's what we were really keen to render on stage. As you said earlier, it's not really an adaptation. It's more a kind of sense of finding equivalence in stagecraft and in dance for some of the things that she was doing in writing, in the same way as she was finding literary equivalence for some of those things that she found in painting or in music. But you are right that she envied music and dance for the way that they could very immediately evoke emotion and kind of go straight to the heart of the matter without kind of any need for a whole load of extraneous plot in order to hang those emotions on. So, and I'm thinking, for example, things like in Mrs. Dalloway, as Devon mentioned, it's about a woman looking back on her past. And we were able to just quite simply have two dancers to double cast that role. So on the page, you get that illusion, because Woolf is very good at doing this kind of stream of consciousness, very fluid writing, which gives the illusion that two things are coexisting. But actually, they're really, technically, she's talking about one thing after another. But on stage, we can actually have those two characters live. And that in itself, the minute you see, you know, the older Mrs. Dalloway and the younger Clarissa together, that in itself is incredibly moving and a kind of a shortcut to one of the big themes of the play, of the book, sorry.
Yeah, and the sensory quality of her writing is so clear, even from just a cursory read of some of her quotes. So as dancers, Calvin and Devon and James, what were some of the most challenging aspects of bringing that sensory quality to life? What were some of the most exciting or the most challenging aspects of the choreography for you in rehearsals?
I'm a very energetic dancer. I don't tire super easily, and I just have a quick movement style that lends itself really well to some things and doesn't to others. And I found it really challenging to embody my character in a cooler, sort of subdued way, because the part I play doesn't require a whole lot of like flashbang type of energy. It's a simmer and like a support kind of role. So the coaches, Amanda Isles, one of the coaches who staged the ballet on us, she kept trying to get me to understand that I don't really have to punch a certain section, or I'm just moving too quickly or too frenetically in other sections. So one of the biggest challenges for me to inhabit a new character is to completely ignore the natural parts of myself. So I found it really difficult actually to get to that place of calm and serenity that my character requires. And that's not to say there aren't moments of sparkliness, but overall my character is like pretty a cool guy, you know? And that was really hard for me to be cool.
It's hard for everyone.
I will say one of the challenges came when we were working with Wayne on part 2, Becomings. It was his first day in the studio, and we did a run through, and everybody was just punching it, like James was saying, like the energy was so heightened in the room. And I think there are elements of part 2 that call for that, but something that Wayne was more interested in seeing, and I think encouraged us to lean more into, was this idea that not everything needs to exist at 500% all the time throughout the piece, and to find ways of coloring each passage that you have with something different or something new. You don't have to always do it the same. And I think that having that just sort of understanding from him, shared that with all of us, it gave us a chance to kind of play. And I think that was what turned the challenge into something that was a little more exciting to be able to do, because, you know, he's the creator of this piece, and everybody wanted to just do the best that they could and show him everything that they had. And I think hearing from him that, like, some days, like, you come in and you don't want to do it 100%, like, that's okay. But how to make it just as compelling and captivating through the choreography that we had to work with was really cool.
I think for me, there were kind of two parts that were difficult to take on in my role. I think one of the first things that kind of intimidated me before I even got into the studio was just the fact that this particular role that I was taking on was created and made on Alex Ferry, like this iconic legend, older ballerina, like someone I looked up to for my entire career. And here I am getting to embody this same role that also is maybe a role that is on the more mature end than where I am in my life. I'm still in my 30s, and it is something that maybe is like seen as a more mature role that requires a lot of life experience, that requires a lot of like depth. I'm lucky to have always felt like an older soul, so I did feel like it's something I could potentially get to. But I just think just sometimes, like before I even got into the studio, knowing that I was kind of taking on this role that was created by such a legend in such a beautifully crafted, well, like thought out whole way, felt a little intimidating. And like, am I going to do this justice? Like, am I going to be able to even like do this well? But what is so beautiful about working with Wayne and my past experiences on previous ballets and this ballet and just his whole team is that they really love, similar to what Calvin was saying, love for people to make it their own and make it really special and unique to each individual. And each cast that we have is so completely different and unique. Like you can see the ballet in a completely different way every single time. They're all telling the same story, but it's coming from a different place. Bodies move in a different way. Bodies portray different emotions or feelings in a different way. And I think that's something really beautiful that Wayne is able to tap into and like bring out in each dancer. So once I was able to like get into that, I felt really like comfortable and excited about that. And then I think the one other thing I struggled with a little bit is, especially in first act, is that relationship between Virginia Woolf and Clarissa, and what is internal and external, and what is real and what is not real, what's a thought and what's actually happening. And that's so similar to Woolf's writing, is it is like very, she writes in such like a free and direct kind of discourse that you don't really know when someone's speaking or when someone's thinking or what's internal and what's external. And so I think Wayne created this really beautiful space in which the first act kind of emulates that, but it does take a lot of consciousness and thought and seeing the whole thing, the whole picture in each of your characters to know kind of where you fit in and where you back off and where you're internal, where you're external, where you're the forward thinking and where you're just watching this happening. And so for me, that was difficult to kind of figure out. And it's still something I'm exploring every show, is like, when are the moments that it's internal versus external, or that the characters are overlapping, and who's the priority at this moment, who's not. So I think that was something like really beautiful to learn, and I'm continuing to learn as we like continue to grow in the ballet.
Yeah, it's amazing that process of learning continues, and thank you all for sharing those aspects of the process. Maybe we'll move then to I Now, I Then. As our panelists have shared, I Now, I Then is inspired by Mrs. Dalloway, which is a short but very intense and vivid novel set over the course of a day in London. We follow a cast of characters, including Clarissa Dalloway, who is in a fraught state of mind, but it is also planning this party as a socialite at the same time, and is kind of weaving in and out of her memories. And then we also follow the World War I veteran, Septimus Warren Smith, who, as Calvin said, is suffering from PTSD from shell shock and is trying to get the care and connection that he needs throughout the day. So Uzma, what are some of the essential elements of Mrs. Dalloway that you chose to focus on for this act, and why did you make those choices for the staging?
Well, I mean, there's so much to say, but I guess in a nutshell, one of the key themes of the novel, and also of I Now, I Then, is this sense of time, this sense of looking back, and perhaps things that have now been lost forever, or things that you might get a second chance with. So Clarissa is recovering from the flu from which she nearly died. Septimus has come back from the war and he's broken by it. Both of them are extremely sensitive individuals who kind of feel life very intensely, almost overwhelmingly. And Clarissa is sort of haunted by the memory of her past loves. You know, Peter, who is in a sense the one who got away, who was kind of the great love of her life, who she didn't end up marrying. She ended up going for the safe choice, Richard, who takes care of her and just enables her to really exist. And also Sally, who was her dear friend, but also possibly the only person who she really had this sense of strong sexual connection with. Likewise, Septimus is kind of haunted by the ghost of his captain, but also the great love of his life, Evans, who has been killed in the war. And he is literally tortured by the figment of Evans, who keeps coming back to sort of haunt him and talk to him. So there's that sense of kind of time moving backwards and forwards through flashback or through memory or through hauntings. Also, one of the big themes is around, as I just mentioned, kind of these relationships that they both have with their spouses, who in a way are both people that they feel. In Septimus's case, he marries this woman, Rezia, who is a hat maker. There's something incredibly creative and grounded about her. And he sort of clutches onto her, thinking that in a way she can save him. And likewise, Clarissa has married Richard. He's a member of the House of Parliament. He's you know, he's got status, he's got wealth, he's got tremendous security and privilege. But against those relationships, those kind of traditional marriage relationships, they both have these intense same-sex relationships, Clarissa with Sally and Septimus with Evans. So that's another kind of big theme of the ballet. And I guess the third thing to talk about that's really important is madness or mental illness. As you probably know, Woolf suffered from mental illness. We don't quite know what it was, had some aspects in common with schizophrenia, also with bipolar disorder. And in a way, Septimus, this tortured man who is haunted by the love of his life, who hears the birds speaking in Greek and sees visions of the dead and hears voices telling him what to do, is in a way a representation of Woolf's own struggles. And she talked about, when writing this book, she writes to a friend how it took her ages and ages to be able to get to grips with this subject, because in the novel, Septimus is in fact sent away. Well, he's about to be sent away by this eminent psychiatrist who he turns to for help, but this awful man decides that for his own good, he must be sent away. And this is something that happens to Woolf in her life as well. She was sent to a retreat where she wasn't allowed to read, which for her was, you know, one of the main pleasures of her life. And she writes to her friend, you know, you can't think what a raging furnace it still is for me, madness and doctors and being forced. And so this theme of madness is a very key one that we wanted to highlight. And in fact, in the ballet, in the right center of the ballet, there's a duet between Virginia and Septimus, in which we show her kind of grappling with the writing of that character.
Yeah, and picking up on that theme of mental illness, fraught mental states, being separated from society for reasons of your mentality. What was it like portraying these mental states on stage? You know, how does the choreography for Clarissa, for Peter, for Septimus express these different states of mind, and what's it like performing that?
I was just going to say, I do think a lot of what was really beautiful about this whole production, I find, is just the comprehensiveness of every aspect of the production, from the music to the choreography, to the sets, to the lighting, to all of this. They really do a lot of that work for you as a dancer, which is like really beautiful. That I was thinking, especially in the third act, I know we're talking about first act, but in Tuesday, it begins with the reading of her suicide letter in complete silence, as Virginia Woolf character standing there, listening to this hauntingly beautiful written note to the lover, to your one loved husband that you're leaving behind. really sets you in the mindset of where you need to be. And I think throughout a lot of this work, it does put you in that space, whether you want to be in that headspace or not. The lighting, the music, there's always all these layers that are adding to your ability to kind of, as an artist, like jump deeply into these headspaces that maybe aren't easy places to get to on your own, or scary places to get to on your own, that allow the beauty of this production is so all-encompassing and so whole that it really allows you to go there from a pretty full way.
I was just gonna, I mean, Devon, that was what I was feeling about that too. And something that Uzma mentioned, that the idea behind the entire creation of the production was not necessarily like a literal thing, but how did it make you feel? How did it take you to a place where the senses were heightened? And as Devon mentioned, with the lighting, with the music, the choreography, the way that it's staged, just being present in that, it just allows you to go there. It allows you to just live in that state. I've personally never had the opportunity to perform a role by someone that has a mental illness, such as PTSD or shell shock. But my dad and a lot of members of my family were in the military, so being able to have known kind of what those experiences were like for them, and coming back into civilian life and not being able to feel like they fit, and hearing those stories growing up, now being able to play a role like this also helped to kind of inform, like, even though Septimus is in his mind with these hallucinations, that for him is also a real world and a real existence. So yeah, it's all of that. It's what's been created for us to be able to live in that space, and the experiences to be able to layer on top of the role.
As Devon and Calvin were saying, you can really feel that we as an audience are being brought into a cohesive world that treats these characters' reality as deeply worthy of expression and exploration, and all elements of the staging are really working together to explore that. So maybe, Uzma, could you just briefly tell us about this really distinctive set? It's very architectural. It complements the staging in these very distinct ways. What was the thinking behind that set for the first act?
Well, so not to give too much away, but the set design is 3 large wooden frames of different sizes, and they all rotate. And once they start, they can't stop. So there's a sense in which the mode of Mrs. Dalloway, which is, as you mentioned, written over the space of 24 hours, that almost that is replicated in the movement of the set. So it has its own authority. Those frames are going to turn on their own time, and the story has to unfold within the time frame that's set by that formal parameter. And then also, I think, they represent multiple things. Of course, there's this idea, as she tunnels back and forward through time from the present to the past and back to the present again, that there are these windows opening up. So these frames often function in that way. You see characters as Clarissa or Septimus remember people. They enter sometimes through the frame. Sometimes you see them trapped within the frame when they're held within someone's memory, or perhaps in their own life they feel themselves to be almost trapped in a square with nowhere to go. And then, of course, in the novel, Septimus jumps out of a window. He kills himself by jumping out of a Bloomsbury window and being impaled on the railings below. And in a sense, that one of the frames becomes a literal window for that to happen as well.
Yeah, it's an amazing set and a very interesting way to represent time on stage. And maybe that kind of represents a great jumping off point, because the second act is also deeply concerned with time and time traveling. So it's an adaptation and a response to Orlando. The second act is titled Becomings. And Orlando is perhaps the Woolf's most fantastical works. It follows the titular character of Orlando over the course of 300 years. So many wonderful treatments of time in this novel. And during this period of 300 years, they have many adventures, they have many love affairs, and they also have this extraordinary transformation from a man into a woman. So Orlando is really considered this path-breaking work in queer literature that treats gender and sexuality as malleable and as something that is fluid and can be performed in different ways. Calvin, you're one of the principal dancers. What was it like exploring this theme of gender fluidity in Becomings?
It was a lot of fun. I
Looks
think,
it.
yeah, I think that was one of the first things that Wayne said to all of us when he came to work on Becomings, was that he wanted us to kind of imagine that we were sort of like these shards of glass, just fragmented, and nothing had in a way it was genderless. Like no one had a specific societal, this is what you are, this is what you're not. And I think it's built into the choreography. I love how Becomings has this sort of the stagecraft of it is like this abyss. It's like complete voids of space, and then out of that you have these like we mentioned before, this sort of idea of transformation and travel through time. And it kind of reminds me of the universe and how we all exist in it at different points of time. The idea of gender in this, I think, again, it just sort of felt fun to be able to explore different sides of what each of us think gender is, without being too specific on what it is, if that makes sense.
It totally does. And it's such an exuberant part of the ballet in which we see these collisions. It is like seeing stars shimmer and reform on stage. It's really kind of thrilling to watch. And then the score, there's elements of electronic music as well that's coming in. And I'm also very curious about how the lighting works in this particular act. Uzma, could you tell us a little bit about the design for this and what themes you're kind of trying to draw out here, and what decisions were made about the lighting design?
Yeah, so as Calvin said, there's definitely a sense of a vast universe. And as you mentioned, Orlando goes through 300 years of time, and she travels at increasing speed as the novel goes on. Woolf was incredibly interested in the popular astronomy lectures that were coming out at the time, the new theories Einstein and Bohr were talking about at that time, relativities happening around that time. And she and her colleagues were getting a sense of human life as being just the merest flash in the pan, this tiny, minuscule, fragile thing, which is unfolding against the backdrop of a huge universe, which is itself evolving and morphing and expanding. So in a way, often Orlando is kind of talked about as this sort of rather arch period piece, but really it's kind of science fiction, or at the very least kind of magical realism. And so what we were really trying to drill down to is the way in which she continuously plays with, as Calvin was saying, this idea of gender. So you have, kind of men becoming women, women dressed as men, but pretending to be women. There's kind of endless Shakespearean kind of cross-dressing and multiple configurations in which these sort of gender configurations play out. And then also again time and the sense of all of us, no matter how intense our experience, are just mere kind of insects on the face of the universe, if you like. And in fact, you know, there was a burgeoning interest in Woolf's time in entomology precisely because of this, because people beginning to realize how small human life was in relation to these new discoveries that were coming out about the age and the size of the universe. So really, yes, we were looking at kind of plasticity of gender, the mutability of human life, and in a sense, the lasers. So we're talking about the light here, that lasers were used to really sculpt corridors of time within which each of these intense moments could play out, but they don't necessarily relate to each other. So even while you might see, you know, a duet or a trio kind of unfolding on stage at the same time, the lasers sculpt the space so that you get a sense that these things are actually happening, perhaps parallel in a multiverse, or, you know, at different times. And while it's incredibly intense for those people, they don't necessarily, it's not a story that's going to last very long. It's going to be replaced by another story, and they don't necessarily see the other kind of quantum reality that's passing them by.
Yeah, the scale is really amazing of this part, because it is, you know, there's that sense of, yes, we're all insects that could be squashed at any moment, but that's not necessarily like a disempowering feeling in this act, I feel, at all. It's more about we might as well play and express while we're here, and something that it really adds to the visual stimulation of this act is also the costumes. I was really struck by. Now that you've said that thing about insects, I'm thinking they kind of are insect-like at times, and then there's also this science fiction quality to them, and a genderless quality. Calvin, could you give us a quick preview of what the costumes are like in this act and what they were like to dance in?
Sure. Yeah. So there's everyone is in sort of different iterations of a Elizabethan style era of dress, and throughout the act, there's literally choreography happening backstage as you're taking off one layer and putting on another to get back on stage in the 3 seconds that you have off stage to rest and drink some water. But it's really, I think it also lends to this idea of being able to shed a layer of oneself, or if you were wearing an Elizabethan dress with, you know, the collar, and then the next time you appear on stage, you're in a completely nude sort of unitard, and you're embodying a creature or an insect. It just kind of allows for that transformation and that travel, that time travel, which is really cool. We don't get a lot of time off stage to do the quick changes, but by the time you get back on stage, it's like you're a totally different person in a totally different universe.
Yeah, looking immaculate. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And maybe now we can chat a little bit about the final act, which is an adaptation of The Waves and a response to Woolf's biography as well. So The Waves as a novel is told by 6 childhood friends as they make their way through life and love, and it also explores how they collectively respond to events that happen in each other's lives, including tragedies. And as Devon was speaking about earlier, we open this act with a reading of Woolf's suicide note that's very tender and intimate. And I'm curious, Uzma, why did you and Wayne decide to combine aspects of Woolf's biography, specifically the end of her life, with this exploration of the waves?
You know, it kind of happened by itself. So it's part of Woolf's enduring kind of imagery that she returns again and again and again to this idea of water. And for her, she often describes water as this place of quietness, as this place of solace, as this place of merging. And when you think about that, particularly in the context of somebody who really suffered from, during those periods of illness, from kind of auditory hallucinations, and she'd hear voices and a sense in which her thoughts would run ahead of her, and this extreme kind of fracturing, this sort of dissonance between, you know, reality and what was happening in her mind. You can understand how this place of quietness and merging would hold this kind of thrall for her. For example, she writes in Mrs. Dalloway, our self, who fish-like inhabits deep seas and plies among obscurities, threading her way between the bolds of giant weeds, over sun-flickered spaces, and on into gloom, cold, deep, inscrutable. So you can see there's a sense of real peace and silence around that image. And of course, the Waves itself is a kind of book about biographies, as you say. It's these 6 children who grow up from very young childhood through school age to young adults to middle age, and then moving towards death, losing some of their number along the way. And it's about that experience of facing death. And so those two things, I guess, the sense of the sea in the book, the ever-returning waves, the kind of cyclical patterns of its preoccupations, and also the modes of its writing, plus Woolf's also obsession with water, I think led us very naturally to kind of elide that story of the children's life unfolding with her own life and her journey towards the water, in essence.
Yeah, thank you for that. And there is this quality throughout her writing of, like water, many elements coming together and dissipating and surging together, like waves. I'm really struck by it. There's a passage in The Waves where she is writing, kind of all 6 characters are speaking as one collective voice. And she writes, "It is not one life that I look back upon. I am not one person. I am many people. I do not altogether know who I am." So on stage, we see the dancers really converging and dancing in this intertwining way. And for you, Devon and James, I'm really interested in what is it like dancing as a collective experience here, and how you're all relating with each other, and then of course inhabiting your own part. What is this piece like to dance?
I actually don't dance with anybody except for Devon. The Parada is the first thing in Act 3, and then I disappear, and then when I return, everybody leaves. But my character is that of love, care, support. I am the rock, if you will. I'm not a wave. I'm the like cool, calm, glassy water. And I actually really relate to my character in third act a lot, because in personal relationships, I often find myself to be a very even, direct person or partner or boyfriend or friend or whatever. And we can't control the actions of those around us. And in this whole act, I find myself feeling very much like myself and how I behave with people that I care about. So it was nice to be able to explore that on stage with Devon, and to be the rock.
Which Leonard was for Virginia as well in their long marriage, and that support that he gave her throughout.
Yeah. I think what's kind of almost also relating back to that quote you just read, what's fascinating about all of the other dancers that are involved in the piece, they come on and they're all wearing these face coverings. So you actually don't see like the people, like you're not seeing individuals, you're seeing like this quote says, like it's a collective embodiment of everyone's experiences and everyone's life. And I think it's similar to what I was saying before, like this piece is so cohesively takes on these themes from every part, from the costuming, lights, setting, staging. So this is just another example of where that was really beautifully thought out and like executed in a way that feels really related to these themes of collective experiences and collective grief or loss or a celebration of life. And it is my, I can't pick a favorite act. It's all so beautiful, but that act is really, really, really powerful to get to dance and experience and feel the bodies all moving as one. There are times we're all doing the same choreography and moving as one. And then there's so throughout it, there's times where I'm just standing still and people are washing and waving through. And it feels like, as if I was floating down the river as Virginia Woolf and getting hit and getting taken by this piece of whatever, this piece of seaweed or this, or, it's like, it's a real embodiment of that experience, I find. And there's, the music also builds in this like swelling, really grand, incredibly emotional and moving way that just sweeps all of the dancers, all of the audience, everyone involved in that moment. It just takes you on this like sweeping journey. And that's almost where I say it feels a little celebratory, and that there's an exaltation, like there's a point of exaltation in it that you cannot deny with that amount of bodies moving on stage, that amount of the music swelling to that place. And then it all just ends. It all comes to a close when the James character comes back on and sweeps her, off her feet at the very end. And it's an acceptance of death and a beautiful life lived and love and peace. And that moment is her, her finally leaving this earth and leaving that collective experience that we've all had. And so it's really, really powerful and moving as a artist and dancer to experience. And I have had very few experiences like that on stage. And it's just such a special piece of work to be a part of.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It really is such a moving moment and a true tribute to her worldview and themes. I'm curious, Calvin, Devon, James, if there's anything from her Virginia Woolf's work or life that surprised you in going through this process, or something new that you learned or discovered either through your research or your preparation or just the process of dancing this together. Any surprises that came up when you were thinking about this body of work?
I wouldn't say that anything surprised me per se. I think because I personally hadn't read Virginia Woolf prior to doing this production, I wanted to go into it with an open mind and open heart to the experience, and knowing through the process that each act or each part of the production was so different from the next. I think being able to just be present in that and kind of go with the flow on the process allowed me to just enjoy it that much more.
I think I personally just like I had only ironically only read Orlando, which is the one piece I'm not in, before working on this piece. And so then getting to read Mrs. Dalloway and the Waves and kind of dive in a different way. I had heard before, like, you either love or hate Virginia Woolf work, and I think like I am now like a lover of Virginia Woolf. I think it's incredible, and I love everything I've gotten to read, and I just think she was really revelatory for her time. And I think it's incredible, the themes and the things that she was somehow able to write about and get away with, like sexuality and mental illness, like all of these things she was able to get away with, is like really iconic and incredible, that she wasn't censored in a way that maybe she somehow like other writers of her time were being censored. So it's like really, I think, also incredible to keep doing works based on this kind of icon who is pushing forward these themes that are now still relevant and still important and still talked about, and still like big themes that we can continue to keep pushing forward in small ways, and not get like censored. So that was something really cool.
Yes, it is amazing what she was able to explore and couch in her work, and then what we're maybe able to explore more openly now in these sorts of interpretations of her work. I totally agree. And we should also say that you by no means have had to have read Virginia Woolf or engage deeply with her work in order to get so much out of this production. Uzma, what do you hope that people will take away from this?
I think it's a really emotional ballet. That's what we always hear. And I hope that people, Woolf has a reputation for being difficult. And I would just say to people, I don't think that's true, because I feel like no matter how experimental she is, her work is also incredibly natural and believable. So when she's really using all the experimental techniques to describe the experience of living, you feel like you're right inside it. There's no sort of sense of manner or artifice. It's done so beautifully that it just feels really, really truthful and really present. So I hope that more people will take the plunge and read Woolf. Obviously, these three acts are incredibly different approaches to three extremely different stylistically and in terms of content novels. So start where you like, or start with her autobiographical fragment called A Sketch from the Past, which I think is a really gentle and beautiful way in. But I think I just wanted to also just highlight a couple of her really key themes, which I think are really relevant today. And one is the sort of fragmentariness of life, throughout her work. You won't see this sort of stitched up bourgeois realist composed picture. What you'll see is this sense of moments of being, as she calls them, and selves that are plural and multiplicitous. And I think this is really important, that we are not one, we are many. And also that connects incredibly to this theme of interconnectedness, which is really, really Woolfian. Throughout her work, you will see images of webs, of filaments, of fronds, of threads, connecting each other. And Mrs. Dalloway and Septimus is only one example of that. The Waves is another example of that. And I think this kind of lesson of we are all one, we are all together, our survival depends on each other, and we all depend on each other. It's not a kind of egotistical or egocentric exercise, this life that we're in, that we're all deeply connected to each other, I think is one that is really relevant today.
That's really beautifully said, and it's not easy to represent multiplicity and possibility and interdependence in such a harmonious and striking way. So I just want to congratulate you all on this amazing production. It is so exciting, and we are coming to the end of our time here. So just thank you to all our panelists for sharing your time and your knowledge with all of us. And thank you everyone also for watching and for engaging with this amazing work. So you can watch ABT's incredible dancers perform Woolf Works during their 2024 summer season at the Met Opera House. And the show runs for 7 performances from June 25th to June 29th, with the New York premiere on Tuesday, June 25th. Calvin will be performing on the Wednesday matinee on June 26th, and Devon and James are performing at the evening performance that same night, June 26th. This performance is also the one that's celebrating ABT's Pride Night. And Calvin will also be performing Thursday, June 27th, and the Saturday matinee on June 29th. So please come out and see us at the theatre. We're looking forward to seeing you. And thank you so much to our panelists again, and thanks everybody for watching.